Good morning. Here we are north of the North Jetty, Newport, Oregon. It brings back the time when way back in 1956. I just got here along with the brand new 52-foot motor lifeboat, one of the most expensive lifeboats ever built by the Coast Guard. There's now 4 of them, but at that time this was the only one built in 1956. It was only a month later. I'd just gotten here to the station in September, and just a month later in October we got a call. There were 6 fishing vessels waiting to cross the bar out here behind me. You can see the North Jetty and real light surf today, but that day it was a pretty nice day, but the swells were coming in 20-25 foot high and breaking huge on the reefs and occasionally across the bar. There were these 6 fishing vessels were waiting. When we got down with 52 to stand by, 3 of them crossed in. One of the 4th one was a little 34 foot boat called the Sea Scamp. There was 2 men on board, and they started on in, and when I went out and I told them, I said, the bar's pretty rough, you might have to wait here for a while until the flood tide and just before dark to cross in. They said, oh, we know what we're doing, we've been out here fishing for the last 50 years. And I said, okay, and we came back in to the bar standby, and they started in, but they crossed over the reef. And as they crossed over the reef, they took about a 20-25 foot swell that started breaking, and it picked the boat up and just pitch pulled it end over end through the air, and it just busted all up into pieces. And I was standing down by the bar. I was probably a quarter of a mile from them, and I pushed the 52-footer, and there was 3 of us on the 52-footer, and the engineer, myself, and the seaman. And when we got to where the boat had all broke up, I could see one man about 100 yards, maybe 75 yards or so from me, off to the side, and one man dead ahead. So I'll take the man dead ahead first. And I ran back to the ready box, and the boat being new, we just gotten some new air fenders on board, and they were brand new, and I grabbed one of them and I threw it as far as I could toward the man out to the side, and it just skipped, and he took a couple of strokes, and I seen him grab the fender, and I ran back to the wheel and went straight ahead to the man ahead of us, and he was right alongside. And you got to figure now the boat is going up and down 15, 20, 25 feet and rolling on its side back and forth, back and forth. We came up alongside the men, and I left the wheel, and the engineer and the seaman reached down. Now you're 3 feet from the main deck on the 52-footer to the water. Of course, you're rolling back and forth. One time you're in the water, one time you're 6 feet above it, rolling back and forth. And I grabbed the man in the water, and I took hold of his jacket and started pulling him on up, and he kind of looked up at me, and then he kind of shook, and I'm sure he had a heart attack right there because his false teeth froze in his mouth, and he looked and he shook, and he just kind of went limp, and we took a big breaker, and the boat rolled over, and I went under the water still hanging on, and the seaman took my foot, and they put it on what we call the bullards, the place for to tie up lines, and there's 2 metal posts sticking up, and he stuck my foot right between the 2 metal posts. That saved me from going on over. I thought it was going to take my leg off, but I held on to the person, and then the thrust of the boat underwater, and when I came up, all I had was his jacket, and he was gone. And I came back up on deck, got up, and I looked over to where the other fellow was, and the big break was just coming and washed over him, and I turned the boat to start for that area, and all that came up was the fender. He was gone too. And so I searched around, and the man I had a hold of, he came up, just his shoulders, the back of him came up in the water, and I headed for him again, and we took another big breaker that rolled us over sideways, and we tumbled to the air, going around and around. And then as we came up out of that breaker, I looked around, and he was gone. I couldn't see him anymore, and I looked up, and by this time we had drifted across, and we're heading towards what we call the South Reef, where they break up to 30 feet high. And about that time I seen this series of breakers coming, and I took the wheel and I turned the wheel to the starboard so I could head into the breakers, and this big, huge wall of water came tumbling down on us, and as I braced myself against the wheel and with my shoulder and hanging on the wheel with both hands like this, a big thud came crashing down over the top of us, and I felt something snap. something snapped as I held on the wheel, and I turned the wheel and it went 1, 2, 3, and it used to be 7 1/4 turns from hard over to hard over, and I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the wheel was just spinning around. Something had broken and the wheel was just spinning around. And the 52-footer, when they built it, they put a single rudder on it. It was twin engines and had twin screws, but a single rudder on it, and it was very difficult to maneuver and to handle. And so, but I got on this twin engines and I could maneuver the boat port, starboard, ahead, back, and in the big breakers. And I got maneuvering around, kept the bow of it into the seas, and slowly worked my way out there. And I didn't know what had happened, and I asked the engineer if he could check, and he went down and he says, all the cables from the steering are just laying like in the bilge along there. It tore all the shivs out of the bulkhead going down. I said, okay, it's something we can't fix now. And I called the station to let them know that we were disabled, but I could handle the boat. And Mr. Needles, the warrant officer in charge of the station, he called and said, I'll be out. And he took the 36-footer and came on out. And he said, do not try to come in until I get out there. And I could have brought the boat in easily, but we had to wait for an hour or so for him. And then when he got there, he said, hook up the emergency steering. And I said, well, it's a lot of trouble to hook that up, and I really don't need it. I can handle it. And he said, hook up the emergency steering. So I said, yes, sir, I will. And I hooked up the emergency steering, and you have a big tiller bar you stick down through a hole in the deck that the plate comes out, and then you have 2 blocks and tackles, and men pulling the blocks and tackles, and it's up to me to say, pull on the starboard, which meant the boat would go to the port, or pull on the port and the boat would go to the starboard. But that was my problem. And anyway, we brought the boat on in, and Mr. Needles went up to the station ahead of us, and we secured the boat and did what we had to do. And I'm walking up the station, and Mr. Needles met me at the main entrance going into the station, and he says, I just wanted to inform you that those men, you were responsible for them dying. And I says, I don't understand, sir, I was not. He said, you were supposed to have 4 people on board, and you only had 3. I said, if I had a 4th, we might have lost him too. I said, there was no way I could have done this. And besides, I said, there wasn't anybody else at the station. We don't have that many men. I was either take the boat with 3 or don't take it at all. And he says, but still your responsibility. And he walked into the station kind of huffily and nice. But I knew the situation, and I knew what was going on, and I knew it wasn't my responsibility. And nothing more was said. And about it just kind of ended there, and they held a board of an investigation of why this brand new boat and why the steering tore out. And they came up with the conclusion that as I was steering the boat in the breakers, and I had a hold of the wheel, and I turned it, and you have what you call stops. And if you turn the wheel hard over one way or hard over the other way, the rudder will hit the stops. And they said I hit the stops, but I kept pushing on the wheel, and it tore all the steering out. I said, I'm not strong enough to break 1/4-inch stainless steel cable and tear them out of the bulkhead. I said, there's something else happened. And Mr. Needles says, the Board of Investigation has accepted it, and we will forget the subject right now. I don't want to hear another word about it. I said, well, sir. He said, then another word. Yes, sir. The next day, the head engineer, old Pappy Rice, what a great engineer and what a great person he was. He went down and he checked the boat all over, and he says, what happened was all the shivs that held the cables where they were bolted to the bulkhead got tore loose. He says, and I can fix the boat. He said within a couple of hours, get new shivs and put in there. And he went down the marine store, got new shivs, and within a couple of hours he had all the steering fixed. And so that was it. And about 2 months later, I had the boat out on patrol, and luckily Pappy Rice was with me. He was my engineer, and all of a sudden the steering locked up. And I said, Pappy, I said, the steering locked up. It's something like it happened when it broke. And he said, just hold the wheel right there. Just keep a little tension on it. And he ran down the engine room, and he said, turn it to starboard. And I said, okay. And I turned the boat a little bit to starboard, and he said, hold it. Okay, you're free. And I turned the wheel, and I was free. And Pappy came up out of the engine room, and he had this plate of aluminum. And it was about 5 inches wide, about maybe 9 inches long, and 1/4 inch thick. And the ends of it were all chewed on up. And he says, what happened was when they cut the hole to run the cable from the topside steering to the inside steering, they had to cut this piece of aluminum out, and it fell back in, and nobody ever took it out. And then in the rough seas, and you took a breaker or took a heavy roll, it fell over and it fell between the chains, and the chains were locked, but the rudder was not hard over. So when the breaker hit the rudder, it pushed the rudder over, and with that cables being locked, that put the pressure on all the shivs and tore them all out of the bulkhead. I said, wow. So when we got back to the station, I grabbed the plate of aluminum and I went run up the station to Mr. Needles, and I said, Mr. Needles, I says, look what I got. And I explained to him what had happened, and he says, I told you I didn't want to hear any more about that. The Board of Investigation has accepted. We don't want to make any waves. He says, take that piece of aluminum and get rid of it, and I don't want to hear another word about it. You understand? And I said, yes, sir. And so I walked out of the office, and that kind of ended it. And about a month later, Mr. Needles, just regular transfer, he got transferred to another station, and we got a new chief, Chief Rudy Knight. He was a senior chief at the time, great chief, and a good lifeboat station. And things started changing around the station, and morale picked on up, and everything went really well. But nothing was ever said again about the 52-footer and why the cable was out. And the story I'm telling you now, very few people know it, and it happened, and that's the way it went. So it wasn't even a year later. It was summertime, June, and not even a year later, and I had the 52-foot patrol boat on patrol, and we were getting a lot of calls. There was a couple hundred boats out that day, and the fog had settled down, and the tower called me, and I was just going out between the jetties, as you can see them out there, and as I was approaching the north jetty, the tower called down, and he says, I have a small boat coming through. He said, I just picked it up in the fog, and it's coming over the reefs. I said, Roger. So I run to the north jetty, and I headed right towards the reef, and he said, the small boat is inside now, and he said, it just capsized, and I could see 4 people in the water. Also, it looks like a dog in the water, too. He said, now the fog's coming back in, and it's blurring my vision. I said, Roger. So I headed right close to the jetty and took the 52, and I took a breaker, a small breaker, maybe 10, 12 foot high, and I picked the 52 foot up and started running me on it. And ahead of me, I could see this capsized boat. I could see 2 people ahead of it and 2 people off to the side. And about that time, the breaker released me. We came down, we hit bottom with the 52-footer. It draws 6 foot aft. We hit bottom, and then another wave picked us up and brought us broadside, and we hit, and I threw her out of gear. So we were out of gear, but the engines were still running. And I looked, and the upside down boat was probably 6, 8 feet out from the side of me, and about 10, 12 feet from that was this man holding a woman. So I ran across the deck, jumped off, and landed on top of the small boat, and then I dove off the small boat into the water, and I swam over and I grabbed the man, and the woman was just about unconscious, and I grabbed him and I started paddling back, and I got back to the 52-footer, and the 52-footer has what we call lifelines on it, and they're made to fast to the gunwale. They hang down like this, down like that, and they almost touch the water. And I got him over there, and I grabbed one of those lines, and I put under this arm, and I put under this arm, so he was kind of locked in. The only trouble was, every time the boat would roll, he would go underwater holding his wife, and then he'd come on up, and he said, hurry, hurry. So I had to climb back up on board. I got back on board, and I'm grabbing him and her, and I got hold of her, and I yelled to one of the seamen who was trying to get to the women and a man up forward, and the 2 of us grabbed, and Smitty, he was a big, tall seaman, and we grabbed the woman together, and we hauled her on up, and we drug her across the deck, and the towing bit there is on a tripod, and we kind of stuck her inside the tripod, and she was just kind of half in and half out of it, and I grabbed a line we kept hanging there, and I put a couple of wraps around her, and that so she couldn't fall overboard, and I told the guy, we'll be back. And about that time I heard, help, help, and the guy was yelling there, and he had a woman up forward, and the young seaman named Dean, he came up, and I says, you get a life jacket on. And he said, okay, and he grabbed into the ready box and put the life jacket on. I said, jump overboard and grab the woman and bring her back to the boat. He said, okay, and he jumped in the water, and that's the last I seen him for a few minutes. And we went back, we grabbed the guy, and we pulled him up on board, just the two of us, because Dean was now in the water and just I and the engineer, and we pulled him up and we got him to his wife, and she was kind of dazed, and I said, you hang on with your wife. And I put a couple of turns around with a line around him, and then went up forward and we grabbed the woman and we hauled her on up, got her on the deck, and I told the guy, start CPR on her, start CPR. Well, we didn't have CPR in those days. We had what they called the Holger-Nielsen method. And anyway, so he did the back pressure arm lift method, and he was working on the side of the house in the lee, and we kept taking breakers over the side, so water kept pouring over the side, and the boat would rise up on its side and come back on down. And all during this time, it had been foggy. But now probably 15, 20 minutes had passed by, and I wasn't paying any attention to it, but all of a sudden, it was completely clear. The fog had lifted, and boats in the channel were stopping and looking over, trying to see what was going on the other side of the jetty. And the park up here, people were just crowding the park, and on the bridge, traffic had stopped, and people were watching. But here's this boat in the surf being pounded by breakers and hauling people up on board of it, and things were really going in a crazy way. So finally we got the woman on board, and then we reached down and I don't know why people, when they capsize, most of them all weigh around 200 pounds, and it's really tough to get them on board. And you're rolling, so you wait until the roll of the boat goes down, and then you come back up with it, and you get them in your arms, legs, anything you can, get them on deck. And we got them on deck, got them up to the towing bit, and got that, and then I said, okay, that's everybody, and I heard, help, help. And I said, what? And I turned around, and that was Dean, and he had tired himself out getting there, and he's hanging on the lifelines up forward. So we reached up and grabbed Dean. Dean was small. He probably weighed 150 pounds. Soaking wet, he probably 60, 70 pounds. And we pulled him up on deck, and I said, okay, get him down below. And the woman now that he had been working on, she was conscious, and the other woman, she was conscious, and they were moaning and groaning. I said, take him down below into the berthing quarters, and we have straps down there. I said, strap him on down. And so we strapped him on down. I came back up, and I took Smitty, big African-American young seaman, and he's about 6'1", 6'2", big, strong. I said, you stay with me, I'll need you on the wheel. And I turned the vessel, even with that single rudder, I turned it around with the twin screws, and I got it pointed to sea, and every time a breaker would come in, I'd shove the controls full ahead, and the boat would rise up in the air. Well, drawn 6 foot aft, the back of the boat would stay glued to the bottom. The boat would rise up there, and when we got to a certain angle, boat like that, the boat would go up, but it would land in the same hole. So I dug a big hole, but I couldn't get over the ridge. I said, there's only one way. I said, and the tide's going on out. There's only one way to get this boat off the beach if we're going to get it off. I said, we've saved all the people, even though we get run aground, we can still get them all off the beach. We've saved everybody, but now to save the boat. And so I turned the 52-footer around backwards, figuring I'll take it up, drawing 6 foot aft. If I could get the stern to rise, I could get over the ridge. But with the single rudder, I knew once it hit the ground, it would probably tear the rudder and tear the steering out again, but I still had the twin screws. So I did that, and I waited, and Series comes. Well, Chief Knight at the station, when all this going on, when the tower called down, said he took the 36-footer, and he came out with the 36-footer, and he got to the reef, and he started for us. He was going to give us a line, and he took a breaker and rolled over 90 degrees with that 36-footer, almost washed the crew out, came back down, turned around and called and said, I can't get into you, but I'll stand by here and wait. And I said, Roger. And so I waited until a big Series came, and I dumped both engines in reverse as fast as they could go, and we went up in the air, and we went over the ridge and came down and hit, and the single rudder hit, and boom, all the steering, all the shivs tore out the bulkhead again. And but I was over the ridge, and I dumped it into reverse, and we backed up a little bit further. Another Series hit us, we backed up a little bit further, and pretty soon I had enough water I could spin the boat a bit round again. Now I was pointing out to sea, and then we slowly I worked it out, and then Rudy says, okay, I'll head back to the station, you're in good shape now, and meet you at the station. So he went on in, and we came in with the 52-footer, and he said, I'll get the ambulance called and everything. And they came down, took the 4 people off to the hospital, and the dog that was with them, the beach crew went down to the jetty, and the dog had got caught with the current and carried it right over the jetty, and the crew reached down and they got the dog out. So we saved the 4 people, and the beach crew saved the dog, so we saved them all. And so when we got back to the station, we had to do a lot with the boat and that, and we got the people off into the ambulance and everything else. And I wondered where the chief was, and because I figured he'd be down there saying, nice job, guys, and he wasn't there. So I walked up the station and went in the office, and there was a note laying on his desk saying, sorry to leave you with this situation, but the group is so upset that you put the boat on the beach and almost lost the newest Coast Guard boat. He said they got on to me so bad I had to leave the station so I wouldn't say something that would ruin my career. He said, I'm sorry to leave you in this position. I said, oh, wow, here we just saved 4 people, and they're worried about the boat. When the boat can be replaced, and even if it went on the beach, they could have got it off. But I just didn't understand, so I went into the group office and I asked, and they says, you had no business taking that boat into the beach in there. I said, I saved 4 people. Do you want them to just drown? Well, you should have had the 36-footer. I said, if I had the 36-footer, I said, they tried to get in there and they took a 90-degree roll. I said, I would have rolled over and maybe killed part of my crew. I said, the 52-footer was the boat to have, and that's why they built it, so it could do this. And I got into quite an argument, and finally they says, you're out of line. You'll leave this office and don't say another word about it. I said, oh, okay. I just didn't understand the situation here. We just saved these people, and the boat now there, and we could fix the steering. And Pappy Rice came up and he says, I went down in the marine store and I got new shivs. He said, now have the boat ready to go within an hour. I said, okay. I took the boat back out within an hour because we were still getting calls, and ran it the rest of the day. And then next morning, the group got a call from the district, and unbeknownst to us or the group or anybody else, that the deputy governor was on the bridge watching this going on, and he had called the admiral at in Seattle and told him what a wonderful rescue this was, and he'd never seen anything like it before, a boat being pounded with breakers and pulling people on board and all this. And so the admiral told the chief of staff, find out what happened. I have no message telling me what happened, anything. The only message they got was capsizing, 4 people saved, 52-footer ran aground. So when the admiral had his chief of staff call on down and wanted the story, and he told the group commander, he says, I wanted to take the situation and do the right thing. And he said, yes, sir. He said, we'll probably have a court-martial for him. He said, a court-martial for him? He said, you'll write them all up for medals. He says, that was a wonderful thing. And the group commander says, oh, yes. And he changed his tune right away when he found out what was going on. And out of the whole situation, which is a very fine line sometimes, which way you fall off. If the fog hadn't lifted, I probably would have had a court-martial. But the fog lifted, and all these people seen it, and the district got, I don't know, I would say hundreds of calls of what a wonderful rescue this was. And so I and Dean got the Gold Lifesaving Medal, and my other 2 crewmen got the Silver Lifesaving Medal, all out of it, just because the fog lifted and there. And this all happened right out here next to the North Jetty, and it started off with the 52-footer going after the sea scamp, steering being tore out, steering tore out again. And a year later, we took the boat up to Astoria, and they took off the single rudder and put on twin rudders. And from that day on, the 52-footer had twin screws, twin rudders, and was very, very maneuverable, and is still running right up till today, where it's now being waiting to be surveyed.